I never thought a simple pizza delivery would change everything. It started as just another lonely evening until I opened the door and saw him. The way he hesitated, the way his eyes lingered, the way my pulse quickened against my will. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment. But when I found myself ordering again the next day, I knew this wasn't over yet. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to be. The doorbell rang just as I was settling into the quiet of the evening, wrapped in the comfort of my own solitude. I hadn't expected company. Barefoot and dressed in an oversized button-down shirt that had long outlived its original owner, I hesitated. The fabric draped loosely over my shoulders, the sleeves rolled up just past my elbows, and the top buttons left undone. It was a relic of the past, something familiar, something that still carried a trace of warmth, even if the person it belonged to was long gone. I sighed, tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear before pulling the door open. The night air slipped through the gap, cool against my skin. Standing on my doorstep was a young man, shifting his weight from foot to foot, a pair of pizza boxes balanced in his hands. His uniform was neat but slightly wrinkled, his cap tilted at an angle as though he had adjusted it too many times. Tousled copper hair peeked from beneath the brim, and when his eyes met mine, they widened just slightly before flickering downward. He looked young, early 20s, maybe, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made me pause. The silence stretched, thick with something unspoken. His grip on the pizza boxes tightened, his jaw tensing for just a moment before he cleared his throat. I realized I was still standing there, barefoot in nothing but an old shirt, and a breeze slipped through the doorway, brushing the hem against my bare thighs. His gaze dipped, just for a second, before he snapped his eyes back up, his face betraying a mixture of politeness and panic. I gave a small smile, as if to diffuse the tension, and reached for the boxes. But my grip was clumsy, thrown off by the stack of mail and phone I had been holding, and an envelope slipped free, fluttering to the ground between us. Instinctively, I bent to retrieve it just as he shifted to adjust his hold on the pizzas. The sudden movement knocked one of the boxes off balance, and for a brief moment, it teetered dangerously before he caught it at the last second. His laugh was nervous, a quiet chuckle under his breath, his face turning a shade darker. I straightened, my fingers brushing against his as I finally took the pizzas from his hands. His skin was warm, the contact fleeting but noticeable. I felt him stiffen slightly, his breath catching just enough to confirm that I wasn't imagining things. I handed him a folded bill without much thought, watching as he hesitated before closing his fingers around it. He lingered for half a second too long, as if debating whether to say something more, but instead, he gave a quick nod and turned away. His steps were measured, his movements just a little too deliberate, as if he was keenly aware of my eyes on him as he made his way back down the steps. When I shut the door behind me, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. I leaned against the wood, exhaling slowly. It had been nothing, just a simple transaction. And yet, the air still carried a charge, something almost tangible. The scent of melted cheese and garlic filled the living room as I set the boxes down, my cat, Oliver, stretching lazily from his spot on the couch. "Looks like it's just us again," I murmured, picking up a slice. But even as I chewed, my thoughts weren't on the food. Instead, I found myself remembering the way the boy had looked at me, the nervous flicker of his gaze, the way his hands had fumbled ever so slightly. There had been something sweet about it, something real. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something stir inside me, a quiet reminder that I was still capable of being noticed. I hadn't intended to think about him again. It should have been nothing more than an ordinary moment, a simple transaction. But as I moved through my usual routine, his face kept surfacing in my thoughts. The way his hands had trembled just slightly as he passed me the pizza, the nervous flicker in his eyes when he realized how little I was wearing, it all lingered in the back of my mind, refusing to fade. The house felt too quiet the next morning, the kind of silence that stretched over everything like a weighted blanket. I went about my day as usual, but a restlessness settled deep in my bones, making it impossible to focus on anything for long. I told myself it was nothing, that I had imagined the entire thing. But I knew better. By mid-afternoon, I caught myself scrolling through the pizza delivery app, my finger hovering over the reorder button. It was ridiculous. There was no guarantee that he would be the one to deliver it again, and yet, the thought alone sent a small thrill through me. My heart drummed a little too fast for something so trivial, but I didn't stop myself. I tapped the button, placed the order, and set my phone aside before I could overthink it. The minutes crawled by. I busied myself with small tasks, straightening up the living room, folding a blanket that didn't really need folding, adjusting the books on the shelf just for the sake of movement. I caught myself glancing at the clock too often, my pulse quickening as the estimated delivery time approached. When the doorbell finally rang, I exhaled, trying to steady myself before I walked over. I wasn't nervous. That would be ridiculous. I was simply curious. But when I pulled open the door, it wasn't him. A different delivery driver stood in his place, a tall young man with smooth dark skin and sharp green eyes that held an easy confidence. He smiled as he held out the pizza boxes, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested he was used to getting attention. "Afternoon," he said, his voice rich and warm. For a brief moment, I hesitated, thrown off by the unexpected change. I had spent the last 30 minutes anticipating one face, and now here was another. A very different one, but striking nonetheless. I took the pizzas, my fingers brushing lightly against his as I did. He didn't flinch like the last one. If anything, his grip lingered a second too long, deliberate in a way that sent a different kind of awareness through me. "You've got good taste in pizza," he noted, glancing at the receipt. 2 days in a row? I let out a small laugh, caught somewhere between amusement and embarrassment. "What can I say? I know what I like." His smile widened just slightly, a flicker of intrigue passing through his eyes. For a moment, we stood there, the silence between us filled with an unspoken possibility. And then, as if making a split-second decision, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper, holding it out to me. "In case you ever want delivery outside of work hours," he said smoothly. I raised an eyebrow but took the paper without hesitation. His name, Aaron, was scrawled across it, followed by a phone number. "Do you give your number to all your customers?" I asked, a teasing edge to my voice. "Only the interesting ones." He winked, then turned and walked back toward his car without waiting for a response. I stood in the doorway for a few moments longer, staring at the paper in my hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just attraction, but possibility. When I finally closed the door and carried the pizzas inside, I realized I was smiling. Maybe it was just a pizza delivery. Or maybe it was something more. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to find out. The slip of paper with Aaron's number sat on my kitchen counter all evening. I hadn't thrown it away, but I also hadn't picked it up again. It wasn't like I was waiting for something. I wasn't some foolish girl, giddy over a phone number. And yet, every time I passed by, my fingers itched to reach for it. The night stretched on, and I busied myself with the usual distractions, television, a book, even an attempt at tidying up. But my mind kept circling back to him. To the way he had stood there, utterly at ease, his voice warm and laced with amusement. To the way he had given me his number so confidently, without hesitation, as if he already knew I would use it. There was an unshakable feeling that he had seen something in me that even I had forgotten existed. As the evening deepened, I poured myself a glass of wine, letting the rich aroma settle in the air. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock in the living room, the rhythmic sound a stark contrast to the thoughts stirring in my mind. I found myself standing by the window, staring at the empty street, the glow of the street lamps casting long shadows. My reflection in the glass looked different somehow, more alive, more expectant. With a deep breath, I reached for my phone, my fingers hesitating over the screen. A message formed before I could second-guess myself. It was short, light-hearted, laced with just enough curiosity to test the waters. The response came almost instantly, as if he had been waiting. The words on the screen were bold, confident, leaving no room for hesitation. He wasn't one to fumble or overthink, he knew exactly what he was doing. That certainty sent a strange thrill through me, something warm and unsettling all at once. I let my fingers hover over the screen, contemplating my next move. There was no denying that I was intrigued, drawn to the ease with which he carried himself. He made no apologies for his interest, no attempt to downplay it, and for once, I found myself responding in kind. The playful exchange stretched on, each message laced with an unspoken invitation, each response pushing the conversation closer to something neither of us had fully acknowledged yet. The wine in my glass had dwindled to its last sip when I finally typed out the words that would tip the balance. It wasn't coy or hesitant, it was an open door, a deliberate step forward. My pulse quickened the moment I hit send, the finality of it settling over me like the crisp air outside. There was no taking it back now. I set my phone down, walking slowly to the mirror in the hallway. The reflection staring back at me wasn't someone waiting. It was someone who had made a choice. A slow smile tugged at the corner of my lips as I ran a hand through my hair, smoothing down the loose strands. For the first time in years, I felt something stir beneath the surface, a quiet kind of anticipation, a thrill that pulsed just beneath my skin. The night wasn't over yet, the hours that followed stretched out in a slow, simmering haze. My phone sat on the coffee table, the glow of the screen fading in and out as notifications rolled in. Each vibration sent a ripple of energy through me, a reminder of the step I had taken. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I knew that whatever was about to happen, I had already decided not to stop it. The house felt warmer than before, as if the air itself had shifted. I moved through the dimly lit rooms with a deliberate slowness, my senses sharpened, my mind restless. The anticipation of waiting, of knowing that I had invited something unknown into my space, sent a quiet thrill through me. I traced my fingers along the edge of the counter, the smooth surface cool beneath my touch. It grounded me for a moment before the vibration of my phone pulled me back. His message was brief, direct. He was nearby. I exhaled, setting the phone down without responding. A part of me still wanted to hesitate, to analyze, to tell myself this was irrational. But I ignored it. My hands moved on their own, adjusting the hem of my dress, smoothing down my hair. The old version of myself, the one that had long since made peace with quiet nights and predictability, felt like a stranger. A soft knock at the door sent my heart hammering. The sound was subtle, unhurried, as if he already knew I was standing just on the other side. The room felt smaller, the space between us reduced to a few inches of wood and uncertainty. I swallowed the last of my nerves and reached for the handle, my fingers cool against the metal. As the door swung open, the night air curled around my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of something fresh and unfamiliar. And there he was. Aaron stood just beyond the threshold, the low glow of the street lamp casting faint shadows across his face. His presence filled the space between us effortlessly, his stance easy, his gaze steady. He wasn't nervous, not like the first time we had met. If anything, he looked like he belonged here, as if he had always known this moment would come. The silence that stretched between us was thick, but not uncomfortable. It wasn't the awkward stillness of two strangers meeting, it was something else. Something charged. He let his eyes sweep over me slowly, not in a way that felt rushed or greedy, but deliberate, as if taking in something he wanted to commit to memory. I didn't move at first, didn't speak. I simply watched him, letting the moment stretch until it became something tangible. And then, without overthinking, without hesitating, I stepped back, wordlessly inviting him inside. He didn't rush. He crossed the threshold as if he had all the time in the world, as if there was no doubt in his mind that he would be welcome. The soft click of the door closing behind him felt final, like the world outside had faded away, leaving only this space, this moment. I could feel the shift between us, the slow unraveling of restraint. My pulse quickened, heat curling in my stomach, but I didn't move away. He was close now, close enough that the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the lingering warmth of the room. I tilted my chin slightly, meeting his gaze, waiting. The distance between us was barely a breath, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one waiting to be chosen. I had already made my choice. The moment stretched between us, thick with anticipation. The room, once so familiar and quiet, now felt like something entirely different, a space holding its breath, waiting. Aaron stood just inside the doorway, his posture relaxed but his eyes watching me carefully, reading me in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. The air was heavier than before, tinged with something unspoken, something neither of us had voiced but both understood. He didn't reach for me, didn't press forward. He simply existed in the space, giving me time to decide. And maybe that was what made this feel so different. There was no rush, no urgency. Just the weight of the choice I had already made. I moved first, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My feet carried me forward with slow, deliberate steps, closing the small gap between us until I could feel the warmth of him radiating outward. The proximity was intoxicating, pulling at something deep in my chest. My fingers skimmed the fabric of his jacket, testing the reality of him standing here, of this moment being real. He remained still as I traced the seam along his sleeve, as if allowing me the space to explore, to make sure this was truly what I wanted. There was something strangely intimate about it, about the way he let me take my time. A quiet breath escaped me as I tilted my chin up, my eyes searching his. He held my gaze without hesitation, his expression unreadable but steady. No words passed between us, but they weren't needed. The silence said enough. With a slow inhale, I reached for the buttons on his jacket, undoing them one by one. Each motion felt deliberate, a quiet acceptance of everything that had led to this moment. My hands didn't tremble, my pulse didn't stutter. For the first time in a long time, I felt fully present, fully aware of what I wanted. Aaron's hand finally moved, a slow, steady touch against my wrist, as if testing the weight of the moment. There was no resistance, no hesitation, just an acknowledgement of what was already happening. His fingers curled gently around mine, a silent reassurance. The world outside no longer existed, only the space between us, charged and waiting. I took one last breath, and then I stepped forward completely, closing the final distance between us. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman caught in the echoes of her past. I felt like someone stepping into something entirely new,